Welcome back to another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Today, my guest is Andres Villarroel. He's based in Venezuela and he's a consultant that helps investors invest in the country of Venezuela. He's the host of a podcast, Venezuela Insider. Andres, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
Absolutely. And where are you calling in from today?
I am in Lecheria, Venezuela. It's quite a beautiful place. At least it's certainly a great place to live.
And for people who are unfamiliar with Lecheria, could you explain where in Venezuela it is and a little bit about the culture there?
Okay, Venezuela is on the eastern side of the country and is on the Anzoátegui state. It's a pretty relative new city because it is between the two largest cities in the state, Puerto La Cruz and Barcelona. So it's quite in the middle. The city actually was developed on the late 20th century, with artificial islands and such, kind of like Dubai. And although, Dubai it's quite a overstatement, although it was a pretty defiant engineering project that was made on the last couple of decades of the 20th century,
Hmm.
and it was ready by the early 90s. So Lecheria, as we know it right now, is a pretty fairly young city. It only has over 30 years of existence as we know it right now.
Okay, great. And we're going to get right into some very actionable advice around real estate investing and everything. But I thought the first topic we could cover was the one that you suggested, Andres, which is talking about sort of an American's conception of Venezuela versus the reality on the ground. So the difference between maybe what the mainstream media is putting out versus how Venezuela really is today, right now in late 2022. So could you give us a little bit of an overview about, yeah, what it's like currently in Venezuela?
Okay, I'll try to do my best to give you reader's digest of the situation. But although it's not only the mainstream media, it's also these more sophisticated networks like FinTweet or these great podcasts such as yours, and mostly on social media, they mostly people think that Venezuela is like, this sub-Saharan African nation or Afghanistan. It's not the case. And I have to be pretty clear that Venezuela still have some issues. We had a bunch of issues on the past decade, but Venezuela is not this poor country that is projected on both mainstream media and social media. It's a country with a lot of problems, I have to say it, but it is also just a couple decades ago, Venezuela was one of the richest places, not only in Latin America, even on the 80s, in the 1980s, Venezuela was a top 10, top 20 country regarding GDP per capita. So it's not a poor place. It's a place that has been mismanaged by politicians. I have to say it, and politicians from all across the board, not only the current ones. And although we have some socioeconomic issues, some politics, and well, politics affects pretty much every place on earth, but Venezuela has been affected the most. And we had this perfect storm the past decade with some political mismanagement and socioeconomic trouble. And last decade, the economy shrink 80%, something that it was unseen by any nation in history without a war, just by pure economic mismanagement. Although those mistakes that were made, mostly by politicians, I have to say, they're being corrected at some degree, And actually, the economy started growing on a pace around 10% per year since the past couple of years.
And is there anything specific, like in the just in the past year in 2022, that you could point to as being important, other than, of course, there's been some changes with oil and with Chevron and cutting some oil deals. But what I noticed in my podcast that I had with Francis Melia, a guy from the UK currently living in Venezuela, what I noticed is that he was talking about how the internet has been getting better, the electricity lines have been getting better, the roads have been getting better, and a lot of core infrastructure. So that's in a different part of the country in Merida. But is that your experience as well?
Yes, yes, certainly. Here's the deal. Let's start with the public services. Okay, for the internet part, the government had this basically a monopoly. They run the state-owned this company called CanTV, which basically is a juggernaut on Venezuelan communication, and they were pretty much the only internet provider. Now we have a bunch of small providers and some mid-sized providers. Actually, I'm using one of those, and we are doing this communication pretty well.
Hmm.
The roads, and the thing though, that I want to point that out is that Venezuela actually had a great infrastructure for Latin American standards back in the 80s, 90s, and the early thousands. That infrastructure was decimated due to socialism, call it, and right now it's been emerging. They're being maintaining better. They're doing the proper due diligence with such infrastructure, and that's the improvement that we're been seeing right now. And yes, there is a lot to improve. However, it's trending towards the right direction.
Okay. Yeah, that's great to hear. So I was thinking now we could get into talking about real estate, and there's certainly a lot to talk about. I think one of the biggest headlines we have been seeing this year in terms of real estate in Venezuela is like $20,000 apartments in Isla Margarita. Now I know that's not the area of the country you specialize in, but is this something new, or did we just recently find out about these apartments?
Okay, it's funny thing though. If actually I was going to do a video about it this week, and is when is the best moment to buy properties in Venezuela? And I will say the right answer is late 2008, early 2019. So if you wanted those 20,000 apartments on great areas, it actually is. It is you miss the party to the best price. However, if you are still a good time to get some deals, but you have to know what you do. For instance, in Margarita Island, actually, I did some homework on Margarita Island just before COVID. I went there, I put boots on the ground, and
Hmm.
actually, I have on my network, I have people on Margarita Island. I call them every once in a while, and they gave me, the feedback on the current situation. The real estate prices in Margarita are trending up, and those deals are not the same deals that I remember I found back then. But still, you can, if you know what you're doing, you are well assessed. You're gonna find some deals. Yes, you can get $20,000 apartment. Of course, you have to add some cost, because when you buy a property here in Venezuela, you have to pay a registration fee and a couple of fees, and that adds up to between 7 to 10% of the value of the property. So you have to keep that in mind. Although
Okay.
there is another process if you are international and you wanna buy property here in Venezuela, you have to go some another process. You can just bluntly come as a tourist and start buying properties. You have to do some due diligence.
Is it possible to get a residency permit with the purchase of the real estate or prior to the purchase?
Uh, well, first, I have to clarify that we in Venezuela don't have a CDI program like in the Caribbean or Turkey or Portugal, you name it. And the let's say the traditional route, the most legal route is to get an investor visa. Although such visas, you have to apply it on your local embassies.
Hmm.
They're in Europe, on Mexico City, on Argentina. Right now, I don't think the Bogota, I don't know if it's fully functioning 100%, but it should be a good place. However, getting such investor visa, the chances are slim to none. There is a lot of red tape. Right now, this is the status quo for such visas. However, I'm gonna keep posting. I'm looking every day for news to laws to change, and they have been changing some. So I'm gonna keep people updated on my social media, on my platforms, if that thing changes. However, if you want to buy a property and you can get the investor visa, I suggest, if you are really committed to buying property here in Venezuela, try to get the investor visa, go and do the
So
due
get the
diligence.
visa first.
Yes, get the visa first, the investor visa.
Hmm.
However, you go to the embassy, start looking for the requirements, because it changed a little bit between embassy to embassy. So it's not the same thing to get to apply for the investor visa on, let's say, Western Europe, to do it on Mexico City. Probably in Mexico City, you're gonna have a better chance.
Okay, good to
Eh,
know.
Okay, although there is a couple of more paths if you want to buy a property here in Venezuela. The other thing you can do is register a company here in Venezuela. Although if you are international, you need a Venezuelan partner. What is usually done if is that the international registers a company, looks someone that maybe signs for, let's say, 5% of equity on such company, and using such company, you can acquire real estate here in Venezuela.
Okay, great. So other than Isla Margarita, what are some of the other good places to buy in the country, in your opinion?
Okay, I have a power ranking for that. I'll put Margarita Island on 5 or 6. And
Okay.
before I mention the other places, I want to say I'm not crazy about the idea of buying real estate in Margarita. It is because Margarita is heavily dependent upon tourism, so it's the main industry. So if anything, happens something, what hits the fan? Margarita is going to be one of the first places to be hit with the prices. So that's why I don't recommend to start buying properties on Margarita Island just for this fact. If you're buying for a lifestyle purchase, or you just want to buy a cheaper property and not expecting that much, just as a call option, you might say, okay, get this, let's say, 25, $30,000 property. However, for investment sake, I would recommend East Caracas, the east side of Caracas, a nice area on the east side of Caracas, although they are pricier over there. So you're not gonna get those such deals on the east side of Caracas.
East side of Caracas. Okay. Of the investor power list, you're saying the number one spot is the east side of Caracas and investing in the capital, the biggest city in the country. Bring us through the rest of the list.
Okay, the second place is Lecheria, my hometown, and here's why. Although compared to Margarita Island, Lecheria, of course, has a very touristic importance, so it's heavy on tourism. Although it's not as heavy, because tourism is like a second, third tier industry here on the state. The main industry, of course, is oil and gas, energy, supply chain, logistics. We have a Fortune 500 companies here. We have a big four firms here. We have a lot of things going on besides just the tourism. So if something happens in the country and you see a price reduction of the market, Margarita is going to take a huge hit. Meanwhile, here in Lecheria, it probably is not going to be that much affected if anything happens. And after
Okay.
Lecheria and in the northern Anzoátegui, that's the whole area. Also, Valencia is on the west side of the country. It's a good place to start. It's one of the most important cities in Venezuela. And after that, I just can give you some wild cards because it's not it's uncertain. I can mention Maracaibo is the second largest city in Venezuela, it's on the west side. It was a huge city, although it's one of the cities that got most impacted by the crisis that we had last decade. So it would be, it would riskier to invest there. Merida, not a bad place. It's not a bad place. However, Merida, the problem with Merida is not as developed as the rest of the big cities here in Venezuela. And but because Merida is beautiful, it's lovely, it's touristic, but the same thing as Margarita. If something happens because it's heavily dependent upon tourism, you have the same effect on Merida. Also, the city where I grew up is called Puerto or Ciudad Guayana. It's an interesting market, maybe a second, third tier market, and after that maybe some of the coastal areas on the center of the country. We are talking maybe a city like Tucacas is heavily dependent on tourism. Also, La Guaira is close to Caracas. Is also it could be an opportunity, but after the first of four names on the list, everything beyond that is just sheer speculation and is more of an speculation rather than an investment.
Okay. So run me through the list one more time just to make sure I have it down. So Caracas, east side of Caracas, number one.
Okay.
Lecheria slash Barcelona, number two.
Okay.
Valencia, number three.
Okay. Okay.
What were the
Uh,
others?
I'll put number four, Margarita. Yes,
Okay. Number
certainly.
four,
But
Margarita.
it's a huge gap. But it's a huge gap between Valencia and Margarita. And after that, I can mention Tucacas. Is close to Valencia. Tucacas is a beach city. Is
Hmm.
heavily dependent on tourists. After that, we can put Mérida. We can put Maracaibo. After that, we can put Ciudad Guayana or Puerto Ordaz on the Bolivar state. It's on the south of the city of the country. And after that, it's a bunch of wild cards.
Okay. Okay. Would you actually invest in Guayana City, Ciudad Guayana?
Mm,
Seems pretty rough.
Well, actually, I grew up there. I spent the pandemic over there, by the way. And the city is actually one of the most industrialized cities in Venezuela. So if the country actually reaches, let's say, 50 or 60% the shape that it used to have, and let's say 10 years ago, the real estate is going to go up over there, certainly. So it's not a bad place to speculate.
Okay. Good to know. What about Cumana?
Kumana, by the way, it was funny. I saw one of your publications on Kumana. And well, my take on Cumana is that it's a beautiful city. Don't get me wrong. However, it's not the city I will invest if I'm a novice here in Venezuela. Cumana is an undeveloped city. It's a beautiful city, but it has this vibe of a small town. So many people in Cumana, when they're young, they're growing there, they want to get out of the city quickly.
Hmm.
It's undeveloped. Actually, one of the most dangerous city on the eastern side of the country. it's a beautiful city, it's a beautiful town, and actually, if you are an history buff, it's a historic place here in Venezuela.
Hmm.
Although it's not the place to, it's a great place to visit. I mean, if you are here in Venezuela for a long time, I suggest you visit there, and beautiful beaches and a beautiful scene. However, I wouldn't recommend to invest there.
Okay. You know what's cool about Venezuela is it just seems like, we've named 6, 7 cities, but the coastline is huge, and there's actually quite a lot of smaller communities as well that that look like they maybe have, I don't know, 50,000 people each, like Puerto Cabello, Carupano. There's quite a lot of them, right? What do you think of
Yes.
some of these smaller towns on the coast? Are they safe? Are they quiet, or are they rather undeveloped? I guess it's a mixed bag.
Yes, correct. Actually, Puerto Carreño is one of them. It's a very important city. It's a very strategic city because actually it's a special economic zone. So you receive a lot of import of
Mm,
the rest of the world from throughout Puerto Cabello. So it's an important city. However, it is a little bit rough, a little bit dangerous. It's not as much developed. So it's a strategic city. It's not the place I will say, go and set up shop and retire over there. Wouldn't
mhm.
recommend that. However, it's an interesting place here in Venezuela.
So we've done a bit of a run through of some of the top cities in Venezuela. Um, I like the idea of the Barcelona Lecheria area. So let's say that we want to invest there and we want to buy a place. Let's start getting into some of the details of what that might look like. And we received a number of questions on Twitter about some of the minutia and the details. So how can a foreigner buy property there? Can they buy it outright in their name? Do they need to create some sort of entity? Let's start with that.
Okay, like I said, the first step is trying to get an investor visa on your local, on the Venezuelan embassy, on your hometown. Let's say Mexico City, let's say Madrid, let's say Buenos Aires, wherever you're located, and Venezuela has an embassy or a consulate over there that attends foreigners. So that be your first step. Gather do your due diligence, go there and ask for the requirements because it changes a little bit depending on the location and depends on the operational activity of the embassies. There is a kind of issue on the embassies right now because some embassies are under staff or the staff is not working good
Hmm.
compared to other embassies. So it's kind of a tricky subject. So that's your first step.
Do
If
you
you
know?
want,
Sorry to interrupt, but do you know like what the general guidelines of the investor visa are? Do you have to show money in a bank account, or like what are some of the requirements?
yes. The thing though is that because I read the requirements on a couple of those embassies, and the thing is they don't specify a clear amount. So it's not like you need to have 100K on account specifically. No, you of course you have to have a proof of wealth, a proof of income, like in an investor visa on any place else. But it's not a defined amount. However, the people on the embassies ask for a couple of documents that make no sense because you already have to do the diligence to make those, but at the same time, you need the visa in order to make such deals first. So it's kind of tricky. So that's why you have to go embassy to embassy if you want to go to that route. Still do your due diligence on that. After that, you can register a company here in Venezuela, although the company um if you don't get the investor visa, you can register a company here in Venezuela, although someone, you need some connections and you need a Venezuelan national on such document. And having, let's say, like a 5% equity on such company. Of course, it's going to be the company of the international individual. And with such company, you can straight up buy a property. So it will be on the name of the company.
Okay. Do you know if it's possible to buy real estate in Venezuela with a foreign company, like an American LLC or maybe like a UK LLC?
Well, what you have to do is register a branch of such company, such international company. You register a branch here, a Venezuelan entity that will be um, an acolyte, a legal acolyte of the parent company in the UK or an LLC in the US. And after that, you can, with this acolyte company,
Hmm.
straight buy property here. Although it's gonna have the requirement that, let's say, 5% stake has to be owned by a Venezuelan.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, definitely complicated, but we can come back to that regarding company stuff. Um, so next question would be, how does renting the place out work? Like, or what would be the income generating opportunity with these properties? Is that an option? Is Airbnb or short term rental an option, or are we looking at more long term tenants? And if so, what do the tenant laws kind of look like?
Okay, good question, and it's kind of tricky. And first, I want to answer this question because I've seen a lot of people talking about they're gonna get expropriated their property here in Venezuela. And first of all, expropriations in Venezuela happened on the past, yes, indeed, although it was for strategic assets like industry, heavy industry, or farmland. I mean, if you buy, let's say, a UK citizen buys a small apartment on Margarita Island, it's not like the government are gonna, some guy on the government is gonna wake up and say, you know what, I'm gonna expropriate Bob's apartment on Margarita. So that's not gonna happen, first of all. And the second thing is the laws, as it was written like a decade ago, are more are more favorable towards tenants rather than homeowners.
Hmm.
And we had some issues on the past on that. I want to say that. However, the trend that we're seeing is that such laws are going to be reversed. So they're going to become more pro owner, from home owner. So on that regard, the situation is improving. And right now, what people do here, and it's kind of tricky, but they only lease properties long term is to people who owns companies. So you don't straight out lease a property to an individual, you lease it to another company, and the laws are different on the situation. So a company cannot expropriate, cannot take over the property, the apartment, the condo, you name it. And that's why in Venezuela, when you are signing a lease, you are signing it throughout a company, and that company gives permission to the tenant that's going to use such property.
Okay. How is it that a local tenant would be renting a property through an entity? Is that something that's common practice, or is that just a best practice that you're recommending?
Uh, well, actually, it's both. Most of the leases are signed using an entity, an NLC, a registered company, you name it. And although you have to understand something, especially if you're listening from the Western world, is that most people are renters on those big cities, New York, London, you name it. Here in Venezuela, most people straight up own their homes. Either they inherit it or they live with their parents or their families, or they buy or just bought such property when when they could afford it. So most people are not renters here in Venezuela. When you see rentals, it's on places with a lot of activity, like here in Lecherias. Most of the rentals here, especially the high-end rentals, are made by big energy companies, big, such as Chevron that we were speaking early. And although, and also, I don't know if you want to know about the yields, the renting yields of the properties.
Sure.
Okay, we have let's say between 8 to 10% roughly, although there are some additional costs. The real estate 101. When you're renting a property, there's always an additional cost. And the thing is, getting tenants that are a great fit. They are qualified. They have a registered company that you can see on paper that they pay their due taxes. It's not just a shell company. They're actually an active company. So you have to do a lot of due diligence. You do it via a real estate agency. They charge for that, and you can get a good deal. The thing is getting the tenants. Let's say you buy a property here, and you might spend, let's say, 3 to 6 months in order to find a tenant. And after a year, they give you back the property, and then you spend like 3 or 6 months finding another tenant. And that's where it gets tricky. So it's not easy to get such tenants. Although you can, the other thing that you ask, if maybe Airbnb in it, and or just short rentals, also it's a great possibility in places like Margarita Island here in Lecheria, or in Tucacas or Caracas, or many places, most of the important places here in Venezuela. However, it is mostly a seasonal gig, so maybe it's not going to be cash flowing the whole time. So you have to be very specific when you're buying a property. What is your main goal with that? However, the risk of a tenant that don't pay, well, the rules are pretty tight for that, although there have been some relaxation of such rules. However, the people here on the real estate world, the real estate agencies are very thrilled, are very neat with the details. So they sign those leases in order to. It's next to impossible legally to a tenant to overstay their contract. Usually, they are signed 1 year leases, and if after a year you cannot overstay here in a property, if you don't have a second home or something. So there is a many laws on both ways, many legal ways that you can, let's say, hedge against that risk. So it's not a big deal. So you just have to know what you're doing. That's it. But you're gonna be fine.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about liquidity of the real estate, both in terms of, um, I well, I think one of the common sayings I hear in Latin America is that it's very easy to buy real estate, but it's very difficult to sell real estate. So, what would liquidity look like if someone eventually wanted to sell their unit?
Okay, that's a great question. And it depends on the market. Some markets, some local markets are more liquid to the others. And the thing is, the major thing is, if you buy on a liquid market, a market with a lot of turnaround properties, a lot of transactions per year, you're gonna be fine. Although you have to know, when try to not to overpay for a property, because if you overpay for a property and then reselling it on the same price, on the same range, it's gonna be hard.
Hmm. How do you get the money in and out of the country? So, if someone wants to buy the property, are they buying in U.S. dollars? Are they buying in bolivares, or how do they actually make the payment?
Okay, good question. And actually, many people here in Venezuela, especially the landowners, the homeowners, usually they either have an account in in a retail bank in the U.S., let's say Bank of America or Chase or Wells Fargo, or also many people have accounts in Panama. So they have so either if you're gonna pay via a wire transfer, you're gonna be pretty much fine. Most of the owners either they have their own international account or they have an account in Panama or one of their close relatives. So on that on that order, it's not gonna be an issue. Worst case scenario is that you might the the seller of the property may do not own an international banking account and they want their money straight up cash. But there is a lot of ways that you can just convert the money in the bank into physical cash. So it won't be an issue for international if it's well assisted.
Okay.
And okay, I want to say another thing. You asked about liquidity, and there is two things. First, we don't have a mortgage market since, let's say, 10 years or so. So basically, there's virtually not a mortgage market here in Venezuela. So for that end, the market is pretty liquid. Although there have been some talks at this point, are some rumors, but apparently for the next year or the year after, banking credit is gonna reactivate and it's gonna be huge. That's just a rumor at the moment. I'm gonna keep you guys updated if you follow my platforms. The other thing about liquidity is, and I read this story by a pretty brilliant economist here in Venezuela, that the private sector savings outside of Venezuela, both from individuals, Venezuelan individuals, and Venezuelan private companies, institutions, they had a savings amount around $400 billion. So that's a lot. And many people lately that have such savings are using it right now in the country. So the market is not as illiquid as you might think.
Okay. Yeah, I think on a previous podcast, it wasn't the Francis Melia episode, but I definitely heard that that a lot of residents have bank accounts in the United States or in Panama, and often the transfers and the payments will happen outside of Venezuela.
Yes.
And I guess the same thing happens when if you eventually want to sell the property, as a foreigner, you're going to have bank accounts in the US or Europe or whatever, and you would just request to get paid there.
Yes, totally correct.
Okay. Definitely makes sense. So let's talk a bit about the price trends. Like, when did things start trending up? You mentioned the bottom was like 2018, 2019. Um, what are the trends that you're seeing in Lecheria and in Venezuela?
Okay, let's start for Lecheria. That's my market, and depends on the tiers. On the high end tier, it went straight up. I mean, kind of like the properties are double. However, the sellers, the property owners, they're actually asking a premium for the properties, and they're not getting it because they're over asking for they're overpricing their properties. That's for one end. Depending on the tier, you might found some opportunities, and we have of course a mid tier, a lower mid tier. We have a low end tier. So depending on the tier, it either grow very much or hasn't grown at all. But although where the trend that we're seeing right now is the properties on the high end that overgrew, right now they're kind of coming a little bit down, but just a little bit, not compared to 2018. On the lower end, we're seeing prices tick up, and most of the markets here in Venezuela are pretty liquid, not the lecherias. one, but most of them, and we're seeing a trend towards up, and it could be double or triple of what it was on the bottom on 2018 because things were pretty bad back then, and depends on the market, and depends not only on the city, depends actually just on the apartment complex where you're buying, let's say, or the residency, the specific street. I mean, just that small details can make a huge impact if you're buying real estate. Well, that happens all around the world. In Lecheria is not an exception.
Okay. Definitely makes sense. I had a question specifically about Lecheria. And I noticed that a big component of Lecheria is the Complejo Turístico El Moro, which is basically like a marina, um, and a very, I guess it looks like a very new development. So is
Yes.
that typically where you are directing foreigners to invest in, is in this marina area? Or would you have them invest maybe in like the Casco traditional town outside the marina, or where specifically?
Okay, depends on the price. Depends also what you're up to, if you are investing long term or if you are just making a lifestyle purchase. Of course, if you can find a great property at a great price on the Complejo Turístico El Morro, go for it. Don't think about it because I've seen many people that overthink the things. You know, they had paralysis by analysis, and they lose great opportunities. Although you can find opportunities in both ends, on the Casco Central, on the Complejo Turístico, depends on the price. It's like, you know, it's like Warren Buffett says, it's better to buy a great company at a bad price, at a good price, than buying a good company at a great price. You know what I mean?
Hmm. So you're saying that either one could work, both in the town or in the marina?
Yes, both can work. Although, of course, you can, if you had a property that is on the same price on the marina that on the Casco Central, just straight out go to the marina and don't hesitate about it. However, the properties on such areas are getting really pricier and really expensive pretty fast. So if you have to, you know, look around, shop around, and if you find a great deal in regards on price, it will be great.
Right. Would you say that in Venezuela that foreigners should be buying in gated communities like in privadas, or is it okay for them to buy in places like outside of gated communities, either buildings with a doorman or just like a straight up normal like I don't know, property without a doorman? Like what would you recommend between those three options?
Okay, that's a great question. But first of all, in Venezuela, actually having gated communities is not a luxury. I mean, most people on the middle class live on gated communities. So it's not such a luxury as it might be in Mexico and Colombia or something like that. So many properties here, many residential complex have their own security guards and gates and CCTV camera systems, so it's not a luxury, it's preferred. The property has greater value and actually more resale value if you go on that route. I mean, but it's not like you have to buy a fortress. You can find property, you can find great deals on both ends if you're asking for the investment side. For the lifestyle side, if you, let's say you're an American and you want to be safe, it's more on the location rather than the fact that you live in a gated community or not.
Okay. So very common that it's a gated community. Specifically about that marina area in Lecheria,
Mhm.
is it possible to have a boat there? Do you know anything about the rules and the costs associated with mooring a boat?
Well, actually, it's a little bit tricky. First, the marina, usually around the world, the marina, where you park the boat, is actually one of the biggest cost of owning a boat anywhere on the world. Here in Lecheria, it's actually pretty inexpensive because we're surrounded by marinas. I remember a couple of weeks ago that I think you tweeted a map of Lecheria.
Hmm.
You remember that? Okay, and you saw there was a lot of marinas and coast, and so we are surrounded by marinas. Actually, here I can just walk 10 steps and find a free marina. So it's not expensive on that regard. The expensive thing of owning a boat here is the maintenance. Of course, that's every place on the world. We have a lot of small businesses that cater towards that. They make the maintenance and such. So owning a boat here is, of course, owning a boat is expensive all around the world. The that saying of the three F's. Well, here it's not different. And although the parking thing, the parking fee of getting a boat is not difficult. The only thing that is kind of tricky is the permit to sail outside of the city, because you need authorization from the Coast Guard, and in order to do that, you have to paperwork in order of, let's say you buy let's say a 21 feet boat, speedboat. You have you need to have all the documentation and the permit in order to drive such boat into the open sea. It's not difficult. It's a little bit of hassle and red tape. However, it's manageable. It's not a deal breaker in order to own a boat here. It's quite a straightforward process.
So, talking about boats, I had another question, which is that, boating in Venezuela just looks extremely beautiful. And I was wondering if people maybe register their boats in Panama or in Colombia or Trinidad or somewhere in the Caribbean, and then they spend part of the year in Venezuela. Maybe they're Venezuelan citizens that live abroad, or just other types of sailors. Do you have any anecdotes about sailors and bringing the boat into Venezuela and coming to marinas there?
Well, I heard a couple stories, not directly. It is possible. It's certainly possible, indeed. Actually, I was due to have a client that is going to do the same route. Is going to go from Panama. However, that didn't happen. I heard a couple stories. It is certainly possible. However, directly, I haven't worked with such clients. However, yeah, yeah. Of course, many people. I heard many stories. The people doing that. It won't be an issue. However, what I've seen firsthand is foreigners that come here. They buy a boat here. Actually, they're very cheap. It's one of the cheapest things that you can buy here in Venezuela. Speedboats.
Was
It
that?
should. Yeah, getting a speedboat here in Venezuela right now, of course, the market is shifting, is pretty cheap because a used one, not a new one, because the maintenance it is expensive for most people, because people, let's say middle class people, when Venezuela was wealthier, they had these boats just as a hobby, just
Mhm.
as a toy. And when things got rough, they couldn't afford the maintenance on such boats. And there is a lot of cheap deals if you want to buy a boat here in Venezuela. It's actually one of the services that I started to promote here in Venezuela.
Okay, that would be interesting. Um, I have another question about what types of foreigners are most common in Venezuela, because I think Americans and Canadians need a visa to enter, but
Yes.
Europeans can enter Venezuela visa free. and I've also heard that it's popular among Russians as well.
Yes.
So who are the most common buyers of real estate, and who are the most common just general tourists that go to the beach and stuff? Who are the most common tourists and investors in Venezuela?
Okay, that situation has shifted from, let's say, 5 to 10 years ago. We had a lot of Brazilians, we had a lot of Colombians, of course, due to their close
Hmm.
nations. We had still have a lot of Americans, by the way, mostly expats from the oil companies. They come here. We have a lot of Chinese people. We have a lot of Russians, as you said. That's a late trend, although they're everywhere. I remember that I was jogging on a park in Ciudad Guayana, and this place is in the middle of nowhere. And I was jogging, and just a guy jogging, and he was speaking Russian and jogging next to me, on the jogging on the other side.
Hmm.
And it was funny. So we have a lot of Russians indeed on the past, let's say, 2 or 3 years. A close friend, went to a holiday on Margarita Island, and on the complex, half of the tourists they were Russians. He was talking about it. We have a lot of Middle Easterns, mostly from Iran, and we had a other couple of people, a couple of Mexicans also. Is getting interesting for Mexican tourists. And although on the late trends around the world, for instance, we don't have a digital nomad community like you have in Mexico City or Playa del Carmen or Medellin. We don't have that here in Venezuela. If you want to know, if you care to know.
Hmm. If there was to be a growing digital nomad community in Venezuela, where do you think it would form? Where would it make the most sense to happen? Would it be on Isla Margarita? Would it be in Lecheria, Barcelona? Would it be in Merida?
Well, exactly the places that you mentioned. Actually, here in Lecheria, and I put it on social media, they opening a branch of WeWork. You know WeWork. You know this
Yeah,
company
sure.
that, yeah, the co-working spaces. They just open a branch here in Lecherias, just like a couple of blocks from where I'm right now. So that's interesting. Like you said, the go-to places, the short list, will be Margarita Island, certainly. It will be on here in Lecheria. Actually, Lecheria is it's developing as a regional hub, a domestic hub. Because the thing is, Lecheria was the best kept secret here in Venezuela. Many people from Venezuela that lives in other states, they don't even know the Lecheria exists, although the news is spreading pretty fast. That that is on the domestic side. However, internationally, it's been spread it as well. We had an international fair right here, and we had embassies from Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Egypt, Poland, and Turkey. So is the word is spreading pretty fast here.
Yeah, definitely makes sense.
Yeah, and I want to finish with the Margarita Island. Many people doesn't know, but Margarita Island is a big island. It's not just a city. There is a bunch of smaller cities. So if you, for instance, want to know maybe a hidden gem in Margarita, you don't want to be bothered, and it's not as touristic. Is on Juan Griego. Juan Griego is a smaller city on the other side of the island, and that also can become a pretty good digital nomad hub.
Hmm. Okay, that's a good tip. Yeah, Isla Margarita is huge.
Yes, yes, and it's beautiful. You can spend, let's say, 1 year or 2 years and not knowing everything, because they have a bunch of beaches and a bunch of hidden secrets and a bunch of small restaurants and a small of a lot of activities. And if you get bored on Margarita Island, there are two smaller islands that constitute the state. The state is called Nueva Esparta. So you have Margarita, is the main island. You
Hmm.
have also Coche, that is being trending up. It's kind of a Instagram worthy place, like a Tulum, something like that. Well, Coche Island is close to Margarita. It's becoming that. It's like a Tulum in Margarita. And you also have another island called Cubagua, que is actually a pretty historic site. It's more of a kind of a cultural, historic heritage site. I mean, it's not, fancy, and it's no hipster. It's more of a history buff kind of place. So it's a bunch of things that you can make just on Margarita Island.
Okay. And from I think Puerto La Cruz or somewhere near Lecheria, there are boats, there are ferries that go to many of the islands off the coast of Venezuela. Are there some are there some ferries that go as far as Isla Margarita?
Yes, of course. Actually, that's the main destination. We have like 3 or 4 ferry services going there. It's a 3-hour ride. You can take your car even if you want. And yes, you can, for instance, let's say you are here in Lecheria and you want to go today to Margarita, you can get a ferry and you will be arriving at nighttime.
Okay, yeah, I saw that. And so is Puerto La Cruz Lecheria, is that the main city of departure for Isla Margarita, or is it more in Cumana, or is it more somewhere else, or
There is the most traffic
yeah,
going
like
to
the
Margarita.
most popular departure point?
Yeah, it would be Puerto La Cruz. Is the most has the most transit to Margarita. Although Cumana is a huge spot because it's closer to
Hmm.
Margarita Island. So it's
Hmm.
like a 1 hour and a half, 2 hour ferry.
Okay, but Puerto La Cruz has it as well. That is good to know. And then speaking of Puerto La Cruz and Barcelona, which are kind of these two big cities on either side of Lecheria that seem to basically form one continuous
Yes.
metropolitan area, how would you describe the relationship between the two cities? It seems like Barcelona is bigger and more populated.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, could you just speak a little bit to that dynamic?
It's kind of funny, and if you want to be, more broad about it, we also have Guanta, that is a city after Puerto La Cruz. It's on the road via Cumaná, by the way. We
Okay.
also have Puerto Piritu, is a city like a half an hour drive, and put we mash it up together. It's kind of like the same metropolitan area. Puerto La Cruz is on the dynamic of the city. Is a, let's say, middle class area. It's a lot of commerce on the street. There's a lot of street vendors, and you have a lot of these commerce. Lecheria, of course, is more of the posh side of the area. Is
Hmm.
more, it's more expensive. The restaurants are expensive. It's more of a upstate thing. Barcelona is the, let's say, the poorer area of the poorer side of this metropolitan area. Although Barcelona, there are some pretty nice stuff, nice things, nice amenities. However, that kind of will be the dynamic here in on the city.
Okay. So Puerto La Cruz is actually richer than Barcelona.
You might say that, yes. Actually, Puerto La Cruz is dominated by some Middle Eastern migrants and their descendants. They have a bunch of, but basically they own most of the businesses over there. Of course, Chinese, and of course, local Venezuelan entrepreneurs.
Yeah, that's actually a good question about descendants and stuff, because that's going to lead me into my next question about passports. But regarding descendants, so I know, for example, there's a lot of Italians in Venezuela. What's the most Italian city in Venezuela?
Good question. I will say, well, I will say is Ciudad Guayana. Actually, we have a club, an Italian club in the city where I grew up in Ciudad Guayana. Also, we have an Italian club here, so that could be a, a nice hub. Although it has to be Caracas, the east side of Caracas, there's a bunch of Italians on the east side of Caracas, but it's not a place where it's dominated by Italian descendants. They're everywhere, but they're scattered across the country.
Okay. And when you talk about like Arab descendants in Puerto La Cruz, it kind of reminds me of in Barranquilla, Colombia. There's a lot of that as well. Yeah, what is the sort of ethnic makeup of the Barcelona Puerto La Cruz area?
I mean, in Venezuela, is basically we have a lot of mixed race thing. We have Caucasians, we have Afro descendants, we have some native descendants, we have, of course, European descendants, Middle Eastern descendants. So that's the thing about Venezuela. It's actually one of the funniest things, one of the most coolest things about Venezuela. The
It's
Venezuelans
diverse.
overall. Can you hear me?
Yep, I hear you.
Okay. So that's one of the coolest things about the Venezuelan people, that you don't have a particular type. You have from Caucasians to native descendants to European descendants. So you have pretty much of everything.
What's the most European city in Venezuela?
That's a great question, and I haven't thought about it. We don't have something like, for instance, Gramados in Brazil,
Right.
or we don't have something like that. And let me think. I have to think, because you have a lot of European corners or maybe neighborhoods, but it's not like you have a city that is mostly European. You
What's
have
like
a
the
lot.
whitest city?
The way the city. Okay. Put it this way. Uh, Depends. And, well, I don't want to sound racist, but the thing is, as more developed the community is, more richer the community is, more wider it's gonna be. So that's
Yeah,
the rule
that's
of thumb
fair.
here.
And so Lecheria is probably up there because it has some of the highest GDP in Venezuela.
Yeah, that's exactly correct.
Okay. And sorry, I don't mean to throw you under the bus or anything, but I'll hit
Yeah.
you with one more.
Okay.
What with among Venezuelans, where do Venezuelans say are the most beautiful women in the country? What city?
It's I'm gonna go again and say the same thing. As more developed is the city, you're gonna find the most beautiful women. Although it's kind of a tricky question, and you're not throwing me under the bus. The situation, if you wanna, let's say, find beautiful women, you can find it pretty much everywhere. Depends on the city. If you are more towards, let's say, the Caucasian look, or the Latin look, or the Brazilian look, kind of look, or more of this Afro look. I met a couple of of international people come here, Europeans. They go crazy for Afro descendant Venezuelans. So I mean, that's your thing. Go for it. And although most people here prefer the Caucasian look like, some other prefer the, let's say, the native look like. I mean, but you have beautiful women everywhere. Now,
Because
if
I know
you
like the
Mhm.
the beauty pageants are very popular in Venezuela, right? Like the Miss XYZ
Yes.
and things like that. So do they? Is there like a city where most of the pageant winners come from?
Well, of course, like is like the capital, Caracas has the most of the pageants, the beauty pageants. But I mean, we have beauty pageants every week, and Miss Venezuela, and we watch here both Miss Venezuela and Miss Universe, and people watch it like it's the Super Bowl, or it's like the World Cup final or something like that. People,
Hmm.
I'm talking every people. I'm talking 40-year-old straight males. They watch the Miss Universe or something. So it's not so it's a popular thing. Now, if you're asking me for the Venezuelan, the women, the beauty of the Venezuelan women, and you want to make a comparison, let's say compared to Colombia or Brazil or Eastern Europe, or maybe this digital nomad hubs. And I have to be clear that your audience is mainly digital nomads, or I'm mistaken.
Yeah, yeah, I'd say so.
Okay, so I'm gonna give you try a little bit overview of the market. Okay, on my particular taste, I found the Eastern European women prettier. So let's say if you go to Kiev or Warsaw or some other major Eastern European city, the average is better on those places. Although, if you compare the average, the Venezuelan on the beauty side, compared to the average on Colombia and Brazil, I'll say they are on hand to hand. They are on that average. So, although I think the Venezuela has a better beauty average, if I call it like this, compared to both Colombia and Brazil. Now, the main takeaway here in Venezuela is that since most of the girls here in Venezuela grow watching Miss Venezuela and watching the beauty pageants,
Hmm.
they know how to take care of themselves. They know how to do, their makeup, their dress, their hair, you name it. They know how to physically improve themselves, and for that reason you have a bunch of beautiful women. And the let's say the gem, the main thing about the Venezuelan female beauty is that you have a bunch of, and I'm going to put it in a scale of 1 to 10, you have a bunch of 7 and 8 on a scale to 1 to 10 compared to most places around the world, even Colombia and Brazil. And if you like, the kind of like the, let's say, the more veteran women, let's say the 40-year-old women, the quote unquote the MILFs, you have more beautiful women on that bracket than any place on the world.
I can see that. I don't want to stop your train of thought. If you want to keep talking about the women, I'm sure the listeners would appreciate it.
Okay, well, if you want me to give you some PUA advice.
I don't want you to say anything that we have to cut later, but yeah, if you want to talk about it, sure, go for it.
Well, okay, sure. I'm gonna try. I'll give my best. I'm not Mark Solo, so. By the way, I enjoy his channel. I watch a lot of during the pandemic. Okay, I'll try to give you an overview how the dating scene is here in Venezuela. Well,
Sure.
it's mostly about status. So, well, around the world, that's the main thing about the female beauty and such. If you want to attract beautiful women, is a status. The the advantage, the ROI that you have here in Venezuela is that you have a bunch of, like I said, 7 and 8, not the most beautiful women, but high-end beautiful women that in other countries they look unreachable. Let's say in Miami, I mean, you have to be like an NBA player, a Drake, a Dan Bilzerian,
Yeah,
something
it's
like
tough.
that.
It's high competition.
Here, if you, let's say, Lecherias of or Eastern Caracas, if you come and you are a pretty decent guy, if you are let's say a digital nomad who makes, I'm gonna put a rough number, 5K a month, and you take care of yourself. If you have a dad bod, it's okay. It won't be a problem. Just groom yourself well, speak yourself well, make a little bit of contacts, speak a little bit of Spanish, and you're gonna be set. It's gonna be within reach. Way better than not only the United States or Europe, but also it is better than many places, even in Latin America. The dating market is way better here in Venezuela than in Mexico, for instance.
I believe it.
And the thing about in what I like about Venezuela and this untapped potential as a digital nomad hub is that, well, the cost of living is not it's not cheap, dirt cheap, like Philippines or something, but it's pretty manageable. It's reasonable. It's like what you might have, a little bit less that you might have on Medellin or
Mhm.
Playa del Carmen or Mexico City. And let's, for instance, let's make a comparison with Mexico. Mexico, by the way, I thought of leaving to Mexico a couple of years ago, but I didn't. Mexico has probably the best ROI regarding cost of living. I don't know if you agree.
Mexico, best ROI, cost of living. Yeah, it can differ a lot depending on where you are in the country, not unlike
Okay.
Venezuela, I'm sure.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, just my take. For me, it's the best, probably, arguably, the best ROI regarding cost of living. However, there are two things that I don't like in Mexico. The first is that is getting pretty expensive really fast. And
Yeah.
from what I'm seeing, especially with this trend that many Americans are moving to Mexico, especially remote workers and such. And
Hmm.
that's okay. That's one thing. The other thing, I don't like the hypergamy premium that you pay on Mexico,
What do you mean?
because the thing about Mexico, Mexico is a beautiful place. However, let's say if I use this, if you allow me to use this term on beauty per capita. By the way, and I don't want to sound offensive because Mexican people are great people, are very nice people, and I always they always treat me pretty well. However, Mexico, it doesn't stand out for female beauty.
Yeah, it can depend, depending if you're in the north or the south.
Okay, depends. But the thing is on per capita terms. On per capita terms, there are more demand than supply on that regard. So the competition is rougher on Mexico than here in Venezuela. And that's one of the things that Venezuela can provide if you are a single digital nomad or single remote worker or you name it, compared to Mexico. That's one of the advantages that I see. I don't know if you agree or disagree.
Well, for sure. I mean, it's an untapped market in Venezuela, just the dating market, if only because most Americans can't even get into the country. So it's really going to be mostly Europeans, I suppose.
I mean, but that the visa requirement. Well, I have a good news at this point. It's just speculation, but I've listening and hearing a lot of rumors that the tourist visa for Americans might be removed for next
I
year or the
Yeah, I
year
could see it.
after.
That stuff takes a little bit of time, but I could definitely see it maybe in the latter half of 2023 or something like that.
Yes, yes, I definitely see it, and actually, please follow my platforms, and I'm gonna keep you guys updated on that.
Yeah, definitely. And so we got a bit sidetracked there, but so let's just say someone does want to come to Venezuela, some digital nomads. What services are you providing, or how can you help them smooth their transition? Can you help them maybe find an apartment or things like that?
Yes, I do a lot of procurement for such things. First, I start with consulting what they want to achieve here in the country. And for instance, one of the main concerns are safety. And what I do is tell them that if you go to this city, if you go to this neighborhood, if you do this, and if you have this lifestyle, if you wanted to do this, go to that place, and such and such and such, and you are drastically reducing your the risk, the personal risk that you might found here in Venezuela. We have a lot of safe areas, and of course, we have a lot of not such safe areas, and trying to avoid the potential client to get scammed or get robbed or overpay for a
How
service.
safe is Lecheria? Like, can you walk around at night?
Yes, definitely. It doesn't get safer than Lecheria.
And I'm not talking about the marina, but let's say in the Casco Centro or something. Um,
Yeah, yeah, you can walk pretty okay by there on the avenue, on the la Avenida Principal de Lecheria, the main avenue of Lecheria. You can walk the whole avenue by midnight, and it should be a problem. Actually, some police cars pass by every 10 minutes, 15 minutes, so it's gonna be okay. I mean, the city is pretty
Okay.
safe. And
Is
the
this
funny
is this Avenida Urbaneja that you're talking about, or is that a different one?
No, no, it's not the, no, está la avenida principal de Lechería y está, and there is another major avenues called Daniel Camejo Octavio.
Okay.
Is the main avenue. Actually, we're pretty close. I'm seeing the avenue right here.
Okay. Anyway, but so yeah, so walking around is pretty safe. You're saying Lecheria is one of the safest cities or neighborhoods in Venezuela?
Yes, yes, but by a mile. And actually, I said it on a tweet couple of weeks ago that we don't count the homicides or the crimes. We count the years without having an homicide.
Interesting. What do you think contributes it to it being so safe?
Well, pretty much is because it's a pretty narrow city. It's a smaller city. It's a city, but it's a smaller one. Of course, the high prices of the real estate is not affordable for most people. Of course, you have some petty crime every now and then, and mostly because of the demographics of the city. Most of the people here is they're either family people, or is mostly also a gentrification area.
Okay, good to know. And I should have asked this earlier, but in terms of like the internet and the electricity, like how stable is it? Like how often does the electricity go out, honestly?
Okay, to be honest, let's say twice per month, something like that, for a couple of hours. So
Okay.
it's okay. On the high-end apartment complex, they have their own power plants, so you won't have an issue
Generators.
if you're a bowler and you wanna pay a premium for that. You can certainly get it. Actually, the oil companies, they get the high-end real estate rented, leased for their employees,
Okay.
and
And how
and
fast is the internet? Like
okay.
what download speed are you getting?
I'm gonna do the speed test right now. I have my phone here, and it's usually you can get up. It was terrible until let's say last year, but you can get services that go between let's say 20 MBs to 50 MBs to even 100 MBs. Right now,
Okay.
I'm looking the app. Okay, I'm gonna do it right now. I must be getting like 25, 30 MBs download. I'm running it right now, just as we speak. And I'm gonna say it right now. I'm having 15, 20. So it's a little bit of it, weekly. Close to 20, and download. I'm having it low right now actually, because I usually have it on the 30s, but it's between 15 and 17
Okay.
right now. But actually,
Passable.
that's a low reading because I usually have between 25 and 30, and you can get a premium service that gets you 100.
Okay. Um, I definitely wanted to ask just a little bit more about the residency and citizenship stuff. Do you think
Okay.
there's a viable path to citizenship in Venezuela? And do you think it's possible to naturalize as a citizen after putting in the requisite time?
Yes, yes, of course, certainly. There is many ways. Actually, this week on my YouTube channel, I make a bunch of videos about it because I have these inquiries. And if you put 5 to 10 years of legally,
Yep.
you can get the passport, you can
Yep.
get the citizenship. Also, of course, if you marry a Venezuelan born and raised, you can get a you can get a citizenship as well. And if you are a descendant from Venezuelans, also you can get the
Yep.
passports. Also, like the rest of the Americas, you can make birth tourism and have a baby here, and it's gonna be born Venezuelan. There are some ways. I mean, there's many ways to do it. Although we don't have a CBI.
Yeah, no, I get it. So 5 to 10 years of residency, 5 years for I think like Spanish, Portuguese, and Italians, and then ten
Correct.
years for most other citizens. Um, do you think you would need to spend more than 6 months of the year in the country, or do you think it's do you know anything about um, the minimum physical presence required to keep the residency active, and minimum physical presence required to continue on a path towards citizenship?
Okay, it will be preferable to spend the 6 months plus per year and go back and forth. And maybe after that, maybe you can spend a little bit less, but still spend some significant amount of time here in Venezuela in order to get the citizenship.
Hmm.
But yes, it's not a fixed requirement, although it's kind of a loose requirement, but still is preferable to spend quite some time per year here in Venezuela in order to get the citizenship.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I think it'd be cool. I think it's a great. I think it's a very underrated place to potentially get a residency permit,
Sure.
with a lot of upside potential, especially if you have one of those European citizenships.
Yes, yes, and actually, the Venezuelan passport is stronger than you might think. For instance, has a Schengen visa.
Yep.
It has visa to places like Russia. So, as
Yep.
a Venezuelan, I can just go to Russia without a visa, and
Iran, maybe.
other difficult places.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. Um, yeah, some of those uncorrelated places. I wonder if you guys get like North Korea.
Actually, one of the main guys of the government was on visiting North Korea. Actually, I think we can go to North Korea without a visa, but it's not something that I'm looking forward to. So,
Well, yeah, I'm looking at a map. It doesn't say North Korea, but it does say visa-free Iran, which is pretty cool. And you get Turkey as
yes,
well, and a lot.
we have direct flights to Iran, to Tehran.
That's crazy. Yeah, so everything sounds really cool. I think people are gonna get a lot of value out of this episode. Andres, random question: where did you learn English? Because your English is very good.
Oh, thank you. Well, I started, with TV and such and music, and on the 90s, I had this, I grew up watching Disney and Friends and all that kind of stuff. Actually, I spent quite some time on the States. I spent time on Miami, Atlanta. I spent several months in Houston. I mean, I've been in many places in the States. I visited the UK, Canada, and so I kind of know the language, and I try to practice every day because I learn other languages. For instance, at some point, I was able to speak French, and I totally forgot. And I'm gonna, I'm getting older, and I'll say that I'm gonna keep practicing my English every day so I don't lose it as well.
Awesome. Well, dude, this has been a very interesting episode with Andres Villarroel, nuestro contacto venezolano. Andres, do you want to tell us again how people can get in touch with you? Tell us a little bit about Venezuela Insider and some of your services.
Oh, sure. Well, you can check the services on VenezuelaInsider.com. We serve digital nomads, expats, internationals, entrepreneurs, travelers. It's a service that is one of a kind here in Venezuela. You're not going to find a service like this. You can contact on Venezuela Insider slash contact, and you can request a consultation in order to maybe set some strategies here in Venezuela. Depending, it could be just travel, or can be maybe investing, or staying longer term, or just spending a few months. Whatever might be the case, you can make a contact on Venezuela Insider. Also, I have a YouTube channel which is brand new. It's called Venezuela Insider. I publish videos every day, every single day, so maybe you will find some value. on such channels. Also have the podcast Venezuela Insider. I publish a piece of content every single day over there. Also, I have a newsletter. Both I have a paid version and a free version. The paid version is on Patreon, Patreon/ Venezuela Insider. I make two articles. I make two publications per week. It's pretty cheap, just $5 per month. And if you want a free version of that, you can subscribe to the newsletter on VenezuelaInsider.com. Also, you can find me on Twitter. Andres EVD is where I found out my Latin life, by the way. Also, I'm on Facebook, Andres Villarroel. I have a also a YouTube channel on Spanish called Financiero TV, but it's actually more about economic and finance, so probably not your thing. And also have a TikTok account on Spanish. It's mostly about economics. Is in of course is
Jeez,
economics for Latin America. So
prolific. You're
yeah, I made a lot of
prolific.
content.
Do me a favor and email me all those links in or send them to me all in a Twitter DM, and I'll be sure to include them
Sure.
in the show notes. Awesome, Andres. Well, thank you so much for all the information today, and looking forward to connecting again. We'll have to have you on as more and more news comes out about Venezuela. I'm very excited about the prospects in 2023.
Oh, sure. Thanks for having me, and I'm available all the time for your audience.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.